Hello, welcome friends. In the last module, I think we have talked about the HTTP protocol, how to use it from a Java, how to write a Java application which uses HTTP protocol. Now, another place or another thing which is again something which is used on top of the HTTP protocol, some component which works from within Java, or so it's that famous component which actually brought Java into the limelight. Oh, what is that component? Oh, it's the applet. So in this module, we are going to be talking about applet. Fine. Yes, it's about HTTP. It's used on top of HTTP protocol, in the sense that yes, it's used within a browser. Applet is used within a browser. Let's see how so in this module, I think we should be able to look at how applet is used within a browser, how the browser manages the applet. Fine. So applet is not, what is an applet? Let's start with that. Fine. So let's start with our what is an applet here. So what is an applet? A few more things, a few points before I start proceed further here. Here, this module assumes that you have some basic knowledge about GUI in Java. You're aware of using the AWT, some part of the AWT API, at least the basics of the AWT and the event handling part. Okay. In this module, we are only going to be covering about how applet works within a browser. Fine. The actual relation between the browser and the applet, what it is. Fine. How someone could effectively use an applet in some kind of a application which is a web-based application. Fine, how it works. Another concept which will be introduced here is browser. We'll like to look at browser as a container for the applet. And the concept of container is very important in most of the things related to the Java APIs. Fine, the Java technology, most of the places uses the concept of a container. So fine, you'll find, for example, you'll find containers in case of when we look at the servlet part. If someone is looking at EJBs, or there again, everywhere you'll come across the concept of a container. So yes, here we are interested in looking at that concept of container, where we'll look at browser as a container for the applet. So let's begin this discussion with, yes, what is an applet? Yes, what is an applet? Applet is a, what is an applet? Oh, if I look at the is a relation, yes, applet is it inherits from what? So if I look at the class inheritance in the API, I find applet is a panel. It inherits from panel. Panel is a container. Container is a component. Fine. So it's just nothing but a panel. Applet is simply a panel. Panel which we use in AWT. Fine. For GUI applications, which is simply a container. Fine, a plain container where other kind of components could be added, other GUI components could be added to create your own good user interfaces. Fine, so you could design your user interfaces in a panel. Same way, what is applet? Applet is a panel. So one aspect about applet is a panel. It has a GUI aspect. Here, in this module, we are not looking at that GUI aspect. We are looking at this module, the aspect which we are looking at is how the panel is going to be used inside a browser, how the browser is managing it, what is the relation between the browser and this GUI component called applet. Fine. Okay, so let's proceed further now. Fine. So what is, so yes, now we can redefine applet. Applet is a panel which gets embedded inside a browser as part of a web page. Fine. It's coming inside the browser. Fine. The object of applet is going to be created within the browser and used within a browser. Oh, how does it happen? Let's see this. Okay, so do we write a main method here? Who is going to be creating the applet object? As I mentioned, it's the browser who has to manage it. So who will be creating it? the browser. Oh, do we write a main method then? No, we don't need to write a main method. It's not an application like all other applications. Here, rather, you should think that browser is having some kind of a Java application, which is the one which is going to be creating this object. So look at browser as some kind of a Java application. And what is applet then? Oh, applet is simply a component which the application developer creates to be used inside the browser, to be used by this application called the browser. Look at browser as the main application, the one which has a main method. Fine. And the application developer's role here is simply to design some user interface, fine, and keep that component, make it available, which can then be used by the browser as part of a web page. Yes, the browser is, what is the browser doing? Oh, let's see how we are using the browser. Before I proceed, one more point. Let's look at, we will be talking about 3 different roles here. Oh, there are 3 different roles. Fine. One is the role of the browser developer. Fine. We have a browser vendor. Fine. It is because the main has been written by whom? The application, the Java application. Who is writing it? It's a browser vendor who has to write that application. It's a browser vendor who will be the one who will be calling the constructor of the applet, creating the object of the applet, and then using them within the browser. So that main part is actually under the control of the browser. So we got actually 3 different roles. One is, yes, we understood, is a browser vendor. He has some role to play. Another role is the role of the applet developer. He is a Java developer who develops a component which is a applet. Fine. It's a Java user interface, the GUI component which he is creating. Fine. But to be used by the browser. A third part, the third role is the role of the web page designer. Oh, someone designs the whole user, the GUI page, the web page, entire web page. The applet is simply one component used within the web page. See, the web page designer, he designs a web page. When he designs a web page, he puts various things. He puts images. Just like he is putting an image, he is also able to include or embed an applet in his web page. And that applet is a Java component. So we got 3 different roles being played by different people, which are used, and all these roles are useful in a web application. Fine. The web application, yes, the browser is our browser is the main client, the client mainly used by the end user. The applet developer, yes, he's created some user interface component, and the web page designer who designed the overall page to include the applet within it. Okay, so fine, that we should be aware of. Yes, these are 3 different persons who could be, these could be 3 different persons. Fine. Anyway, browser vendor is always a separate version, separate person here. Fine. Okay, so now looking at, yes, what exactly goes on. If we look at the usage point of view, how does a end user start using the browser? Oh, he enters a URL, right? When he enters a URL, what exactly goes on? We understand a request will be sent. So the end user is entering a URL which corresponds to an HTML file on a server. So when he enters this URL, what exactly happens? A request goes to the server. On the server, what happens? The server is looking up and finding there's an HTML page corresponding to this resource, and sends a response whose content is in HTML. Okay, when this HTML content is received, as part of the content, as part of the HTML content, what does he receive? The various tags which he is getting in the HTML page. The web page designer might have put some images, so he's getting images. There's an image tag which is coming, there's an applet tag which is coming. Oh, there are various tags. Oh, what happens when an image tag is received by the browser? Okay, what the browser has to do in that case is, it has to again make another request to the server to fetch the image. The content of the image again comes, and that is what he is embedding, the browser is embedding. Same way, just like an image gets embedded inside a web page by using the image tag, we have a tag called applet which can be used for embedding the applet component, which is our Java component inside a web page. Fine. Okay, so yes, let's see what are the various attributes which goes for an applet tag. Fine. The applet tag, yes, the attributes here, applet. One of the important attributes is code equal to. Yes, what is this code equal to representing? Fine. The code attribute should specify the class name, the name of the applet class. When we say name of an applet class, yes, it would be some subclass of the applet class which has been developed by the application developer. Fine. The Java developer has created some subclass of applet where he has designed his user interface. Okay, so that would be that is what is required to be specified as an attribute by the web page designer. He says, okay, applet whose name is this. So name, what he is giving is the name of the class. Fine. And then yes, like the image tag, here also we have the width, the height. Fine. We set up the width and height for the applet, what size the user interface should be, the applet within the browser. Fine. The alignment and other attributes which will be about positioning related attributes. There are a few other attributes. Okay, suppose he is only giving this much, that is, he is giving the width, the height and the code. Okay, what would happen? Yes, if the browser finds an applet tag, the browser has to load the class. Oh, this class, which is the applet class, is not something which is available locally. Fine, it's not something which is to be loaded from the local machine. So what it's going to do? It's going to make a connection to the same place, to the same server from where the HTML page was loaded, and make a connection there and ask it, request it for the Java bytecode or the Java bytecode, the class file corresponding to the applet. So the class file for the applet should come. But where on the server will this class, should this class file be residing? Oh, where is this class file should be residing on the server side? No, it has to be residing at the same place, but default would be it should reside at the same place where you have your HTML page, not a separate directory. Oh, we would like to normally have things organized separately, right? On the server side, we have our main HTML pages. Then whenever we have images, we create our images folder and keep our image files there and always load it from the folder. Same way, even for the applet or the various classes which are used by the applet, we would like the Java class files not from the same place as the HTML, but from some subfolders within them, something relative to this. So that means what you need to do is you need to mention that. You need to mention it as an attribute in your applet tag. So in your applet tag, another attribute which you can add is, you could say, code base. So code base equal to specify the location on the server relative to the HTML file location from where all the classes can be loaded. When I say all classes, no, it's not only one class here. It's not only the applet class which has to be loaded. See, in case the applet class is making use of other classes, it is dependent on other classes, all such classes need to be loaded to the client machine. Fine, for the applet to work. Applet is dependent on other classes. If it is dependent on just the API classes, that's fine, which is part of the Java library. It would be available on the client's machine. But if there are classes which are being used, other user-defined classes which are being used by the applet, they all need to be available for loading from the server. Fine. So all of them, it's not, so on server side, it's not, even though we say one applet class, yes, that applet class may in turn also depend on other classes. So applet and all its dependent classes, they all must be available from a single place. Fine. So normally we might have some folder, and that folder location you might like to specify using the code base equal to. But look at the things which is happening here. Okay, what will be happening? Yes, in order to load that class, it will make one connection, loaded the class. When it loads the class, it finds, there are other classes needed. For each class, it will have to make another connection and load each and every class over a connection. It's going to be time consuming. It's going to make the things slower. We have another option here. Instead of just using code base equal to and specifying the location from where all the classes are loaded, what could be done is, why have each of those classes separately? You could create one archive file the way we create a zip file similarly, or you could have an archive file which is using a jar command, have one archive file created which contains the applet class and all its dependent classes. So you got just single file, the single jar file, or maybe even zip file should also work here, right? So you got such a file on the server side instead of a directory containing all such things. And then when you want now what you need to do is, no, you don't mention code base, but instead you mention archive. The another attribute which is possible to be used in the applet tag is the archive tag, archive attribute. So you can say archive equal to and mention the location of the jar file or the zip file, basically an archive file relative to the HTML. Fine. So in such a case, yes, when it comes across the applet tag, what will be done is the entire jar file will be loaded using one connection only, and then locally any classes to be loaded will be loaded locally from that jar file. Fine. It doesn't need to make a connection each time to load a class. Okay, fine. So that way it would save the time. So archive tag is another useful tag which could be useful here. Another tag, another attribute here to the applet tag is the attribute called name. Fine. It's common. It's very commonly used with most of the other attributes, like we give name to images, we give name to any other thing. So we have given a name to our applet component which has been loaded like this. Okay, so yes, the applet tag have this. The applet tag, fine, you have an ending tag, but between the start and end of the applet tag, we could also include some parameters. Like, okay, so if we want to include some parameters, now this is something which is between the web page designer and the applet developer. The applet developer must make it available. This knowledge must be made available to the web page designer that, okay, my applet can understand so and so parameters, so that you can, for example, you might say, oh, I have the background color which can be changed. You can specify the background color to me so that in my user interface the applet can set a background color. So yes, it says so the web page design, the applet developer decided to make background to be something which can be changed and set by the web page designer. Then he might provide a parameter called background. Okay, so for that purpose, yes, we need an interaction with the web page, between the web page and the applet, and that's something where we will have a param tag. So in the applet tag, fine, as part of the applet tag, between the applet start and end tag of the applet, we can include a nested tag called param. Param will say name equal to the name of the parameter and value equal to the value corresponding to that parameter. For example, someone could be using param name equal to background, value equal to red, or value equal to green, or value equal to blue, whatever color you like. Fine. So it's a web page designer who is trying to pass some parameters to the applet here. Fine. We'll be actually looking at how that working takes place so that the parameters can then be received by the applet. Fine. So that's the way the applet tags are used. Okay, now coming to the point that yes, how the things work within the browser. So within a browser, fine, what will be done within a browser is, yes, when we give a URL and the URL is resulting in an HTML content being loaded where at least one applet tag is there. Yes, remember, there might be a web page which has more than one applet being used. For us, the requirement is, let's see this, because the Java application which I'm talking about, it's the browser which is the Java application. It's a browser who has to be creating the applet objects and managing them. Oh yes, there is this question of managing these applet objects, and each applet object needs to be managed. Okay, how does it manage? Managing means what? Yes, whenever it comes across the applet tag, we understand it has to load the class. Then what? After loading the class, the object of the applet needs to be created. Fine. For that, it will use the public no argument constructor on the applet object. And then after creating this, there are certain things which the browser does on the applet. Fine. These we call as the lifecycle methods of the applet, because this is how it's like the interaction from the browser with the applet. The browser interacts with the applet in a predefined manner. There is a manner in which the applet, the browser would be interacting with the browser. Fine. So we got these lifecycle methods so that the applet developer knows exactly if he wants to get certain things done at a particular point of time, how it should be done. See, now here we have the we have the browser creating the object of applet and not the applet developer creating it. It's a browser doing it for us, right? So at the time of creating of the applet object, there won't be any information related to the parameters or any other information from the browser to the applet. Fine. All this information. See, now one more point. We need a proper communication between the applet and the browser. The browser is the one who is creating the applet and knows the applet well. But what about the applet? The applet also should be enabled to interact with the browser. There has to be a mechanism by which the applet should be enabled to interact with the browser. This would be necessary because even there are certain things like the parameters which are specified by the web page designer. Those parameters need to be available to the applet. How will the applet get that? Oh, it has to get it only from the browser. Only the browser is the one who knows what were the parameters specified. It's the browser who has loaded the HTML. The information from HTML has to be made available to the applet, and this can only be done by certain mechanism by which some kind of a component is made, has to be made available to the applet from the browser. So let's see what exactly is happening. Yes, we have certain things which are defined, predefined and known as the lifecycle methods. Lifecycle methods are nothing but the predefined methods which are invoked on certain events taking place within the browser. Fine. The events like, okay, the browser says, I've just created an object of applet. So do you want to do some initialization? So for that it would have a method. Okay. Same way, your applet may have been loaded in a huge HTML page. Now in this HTML page, your applet may not be visible at this moment. If it's not visible, there's no point in showing some images and running around some threads over there. Okay, so there'll be an indication given to you that, oh, you are not currently active. Oh, when your applet becomes visible, it has to tell the applet, oh, you are now visible. So you are currently active. So there has to be this indication of you are becoming active, you are now becoming inactive. So that's nothing but some events done within the browser. So within the browser, a particular applet becoming active or inactive is an event for the applet. And this is something which is being notified by the browser to the applet, or maybe you move on to another page. In that case, this applet is no longer going to be available. It's not going to be used. That is another indication which it will have to do with the applet. Tell the applet, the browser will tell the applet, oh, you are not going to be used any longer. You do your own cleanup now. Fine. So such things. Fine. So for that, yes, what we have here are we have methods for these purposes, and these are known as the lifecycle methods. Fine. But one more point. These are not the only methods which are used by the browser on the applet. Fine. There's one more method, fine, for which you may not come across such things in most of the texts here. Fine. When you go through text, you may not come across this very often. Okay. But yes, there's one very important method in the lifecycle. It's not mentioned as a lifecycle method anywhere. But that's one of the methods which actually is going to be the first method ever invoked by the browser on the applet. Let's see what it is and what's the purpose of that. Okay, so to understand that all these methods, fine, let's first look into what exactly goes on. What is happening within the browser? The browser has to do some work. Fine. Yes, this is the main purpose of all this, is to enable the applet to be able to interact with the browser. And for this, let's see what all exercise is being done within the browser. So one part, first thing it has to do is, whenever the browser comes across an HTML page, is loading an HTML page which has one or more applet tags, the browser would create an object of applet context. Yes, applet context is another interface in the java.applet package. Java.applet package is a very small package. It has just one class called applet, and there are three interfaces in this. One of them is the applet context. Fine. There is the applet stub, and there is the audio clip interface. Just these four things in the java.applet package. There's nothing more than that in the java.applet package. Okay, so fine, continuing with what we're looking at. So first thing it has to do is, yes, there is some applet coming into picture on this page. So let me create one object of applet context. Fine. Applet context is something which can be used by anyone to interact with the browser. It has methods. This is an interface. Basically, it's an interface so that the browser vendor implements. Each browser vendor would have its own implementation of the various kinds of information which is to be made available from the applet context. So fine, this is something where the browser vendor's role is coming. Fine. So we have the applet context object being created. First, fine, one per HTML page, which contains at least one applet tag. Fine. This enables, for example, this is mainly making all the capabilities of the browser available. For example, what is the browser capable of? It's capable of taking a URL as an input and fetching the content for us. That's what is being done by the browser all the time. Fine. So applet might like to do such a thing. That should be possible through the applet context object. Fine. Fine. Applet context object. Oh, you have the browser having a status bar. You want to put a message on the status bar. Oh, where is it? You talk to the applet context, asking it to put something on the status bar. So you interact with the browser through the applet context object. Okay. So applet context mainly for interaction with the browser. Such a component exists. So this object would first be created. Next, as it loads each applet object, yes, it's going to create the object of applet, but corresponding to every applet, it also creates an object of applet stub, the other interface which we have here. Fine. We have the applet context interface. There was the other interface called applet stub. The applet stub object is created one per applet. This object is populated with the information from the applet tag. Oh, what was the information in the applet tag? Oh, we had the information related to the code base. We had the information related to the parameters. And this is something which is useful. And this is what we'll have. So for each and every applet, there is one object of applet stub. This is the component created from browser side. Fine, defined by the browser. And fine. So now this applet stub which is created also has a reference to the applet context. The applet stub interface provides a method called getAppletContext to make that browser component called applet context available. So now what's going to happen here is like this. The first method which is getting invoked on the applet object. No, most of the time we think it is the init method which is invoked first because that's mentioned as a first lifecycle method. No, as far as the applet object goes, actually the first method which gets invoked even before the init method is invoked is the method called SetStop. This is an important method. This method never finds a mention in most of the text, and there is a reason for it. The reason is this method is final. It's final in the applet class, and therefore as a developer, when you write your subclass, you can't do anything about this method. You're not supposed to be overriding, so better keep mum about it. Fine. But anyway, you can know the mechanism, how the whole thing works. Fine. From that point of view, yes, knowing this method is good. Fine. It's there as a public method, but it's final. Fine. It's a final method in the applet class. SetStop, setting a stub object on the applet object. Through this stub, see what is available. So the first, so initially the browser's role is create the object and enable the object to be able to interact with the browser, get all the information about the tag. So the applet stub has other methods. One method was getAppletContext. So that yes, if the so see one thing. As far as the applet class is concerned, if you can go and have a look back at the applet.java file which is available in the source, And what we find there, they have one instance variable which is a private instance variable to keep a stub object, and there are many methods in the applet class, and most of these methods, they are nothing but redirections. These methods are redirecting to methods on the applet stub or methods on the applet context. Fine. We will find methods in the applet class. When they are invoked, they are just nothing but passed on to the applet stub object. The applet stub is a private member getting set up only through the SetStop method. The applet stub object, fine, which is instance variable there, is set up as a applet stub fine. It's going to be set up with the within the on the applet object by using the SetStop method, fine. And then yes, there is this injection. So it's like an injection. The applet stub object gets injected into the applet object, fine. So with this, the applet gets the ability to find information about the parameters. It can then find information, or it can start using the capabilities of the browser, can interact with the browser. So the first method which is invoked on an applet is the SetStop method, fine. And then after this method, yes, we have then the lifecycle methods getting invoked on the applet object, fine. The first lifecycle method which would be invoked here is the method called Init, fine. This is there, fine. See, you should understand one more point here, that if we do anything with see, normally what do we do when we write any class, GUI class? We would be having our constructor to do lot of things like setting up event handlers, setting up the UI components and all other things. Okay, in this case, this thing you can't do in the constructor for an applet, because at the time of constructor, if you are interested in using some parameter, the parameter information is not going to be available. Nothing, no information is available. So normally all such things should then, what we normally do in a constructor should actually now be done in the init method, because that's the first lifecycle method, fine, though invoked after the setStop method. But setStop is final, nothing can ever be done. The setStop only purpose is to inject the applet stub object into the applet. Fine? It's just and that way it is enabling the applet to start using the browser, fine, or getting information from the browser. Okay, fine. So fine, that's the first. And then we have the first lifecycle method being the init method. Once the init method is over, fine, then yes, it waits. You have your event handlers and other things which you might have set up as part of the init. All those things will go on. That's fine. But one important thing, a few other things which happens, as I mentioned earlier, your browser, fine, if the applet is not active, or if the applet becomes active, so another method which the applet would, which the browser would invoke on the object of applet is, whenever the applet is becoming active, it is becoming visible in the page, it's going to be invoking the method called start, saying, oh, you are now visible, you are an active applet. So if you want to do something, whenever it becomes active, you can do that. Fine. And if it becomes if the visibility of that applet goes away again, or it will invoke the method called stop, and saying, oh, you are no longer active. Fine. So as the state of the applet changes to active to inactive or inactive to active, these two methods, start and stop, will keep on getting invoked on it. So this all depends on how the user is using it. He may be scrolling up and down, and that would just trigger the start and stop methods on the applet object. And once the user decides to move to another page, what the browser would do is, browser would do the invocation of destroy method, which is the last lifecycle method on the applet object, indicating you do your cleanup, it's over now, you're no longer going to be used. Fine. So that's the lifecycle method. Fine. There are many other methods in the applet class which are mainly coming from the applet stub and the applet context. We would like to look at all those methods in the next module. Fine. So thank you.